Welcome to Zero Knowledge, a podcast where we explore the latest in blockchain technology and the decentralized web. The show is hosted by me, Anna.
And me, Frederick. In this episode, Anna chats with Friederike from Gnosis. They cover prediction markets, wallet security, exchanges, and more.
So before we start, we want to say thank you to this week's sponsor, Trail of Bits. Trail of Bits recently released their Smart Contract Audit Executive Summary. They aggregated the work of 23 smart contract audits, and they found that 78% of high-impact, easily exploitable findings are discoverable with automated analysis tools, 50% of all findings will never be found with automated tools, and according to their research, unit testing has no impact on security. For more about this audit, have a look at one of their recent blog posts at blog.trailofbits.com. We'll add the link in the show notes. So thank you again, Trail of Bits. And now here's our interview with Friederike from Gnosis. So today I'm sitting with Friederike from Gnosis and Fullnode to talk about the journey that Gnosis took and some of the work that they're doing and hopefully more. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So besides Gnosis and Fullnode, you're also known for being one of the co-hosts of Epicenter.
Yes.
I thought we might actually kick that off, given that you're now on the Zero Knowledge podcast. How did you come to be on Epicenter? How did that start out for you?
The existing hosts asked me. So basically, Maya approached me and asked whether I think I'd enjoy being a host on the show. And I was somewhat taken aback because I've been a long-standing fan. So I've listened to almost all episodes. And to me, it was just such an institution that the idea that I should be one of the hosts just seemed sacrilegious in a way. and then I quickly said yes. And it all started.
So Epicenter, for those of you who don't know, is a fantastic blockchain podcast. And I think we're often, like Zero Knowledge and Epicenter tend to be like put in the same category often. Yes. It's funny when you joined, I can totally imagine it's almost like crossing over to the other side. How do you like it? Like what have you taken from being on this other side, from doing the interviewing?
Oh, it's so fantastically interesting. I mean, basically you get to sit down and take a deep dive into someone else's project. That's something that being an entrepreneur most of the time, you don't get to do. You just stew in your own soup a lot.
Yeah.
Basically just making the time to look at something else in depth and thinking about how all the parts function together and how the intricacies work, and basically coming up with your own hypotheses and your questions, and kind of then speaking with the person who's put their life into this. Mm-hmm. It is such a good experience. It's very humbling.
So it's funny because like in this episode, I'm actually going to be digging into your world. Maybe we get to come back to the Epicenter stuff as we go on. But I think for those who may not know you, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, where you come from? Sure.
So I've been I've been interested in blockchain technology for a long time. So I think probably since 2013. And at the time I'm a physicist by training. So at the time I had just finished my PhD in low-dimensional complex quantum systems. And I was about to start my postdoc. I did a string of postdocs and then left academia for good. Because I thought, I love building new things and I love setting up systems and I love things that have the potential to change the world. And I could think of no reason why I wouldn't want to do this full time.
Cool. Did you feel like you couldn't do that in academia? Because that's a big shift. Like it's a total shift in mentality to get out of that cycle of academic research or doing PhDs, having courses, having teachers. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you're sort of thrown out into the world and like judge, like how you gauge what you're doing is very, very different.
Yeah, that's true. So in one way, it's very different. In some respects, it's very similar. It's basically building things in modular ways so that you can improve upon the modules systematically. thinking about the best ways to actually put together system architecture, thinking about the ways that you can put together and things that you've already understood in novel ways. That's a lot like physics. And then there's the additional bonus that basically all physicists can code. So it wasn't foreign to me. So it was very much the way that I was already thinking. I also had a degree in maths. So basically cryptography it also wasn't
terrifying or
wasn't terrifying to me at all. I actually quite like numbers. So what's very different than in academia? In academia, there are all these boxes you have to tick and buttons you have to hit. And building things and finding things out has always given me immense pleasure. And I'm not good at being micromanaged or directed. So I actually quite like doing my own thing. And in academia, to a certain extent, that's very possible, but you're still within these confines of, the things, the boxes you need to tick, the buttons you need to push, sort of thing. And entering this blockchain world, at the time, it was still quite easy to raise money and thus get the freedom to also do your own thing without having other people breathing down your neck. To me, that was kind of an ideal situation, an ideal outcome. So, obviously, there are advantages of being strapped for cash. There are also advantages of not being strapped for cash as a startup. And I feel like I don't look back. So yeah. I'm still interested in physics, and I still follow, the latest developments in the mainstream media, but I've never regretted leaving physics.
Tell me a little bit. So this is a little bit about your background, but let's hear a little bit about Gnosis. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, so basically there's different ways of pronouncing Gnosis. So, I also say it without the G.
So for those out there, it's spelled Gnosis.
Yeah.
And I think in the past mispronounced it as well.
So I think Gnosis is kind of the Americanized pronunciation. I think the real pronunciation is Gnosis with a soft G. And the original Greek pronunciation is Gnosis, which is the one pronunciation that we will not let slide. So Gnosis and Gnosis is both fine to us, but Gnosis just does not cut it for me.
What does this word mean?
It's the Greek word for knowledge.
Oh, that's amazing. So, okay, what is Gnosis? I'm going to go with Gnosis, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's completely fine. So Gnosis started off as the very first spoke within consensus and set out to build prediction markets on Ethereum. That's still very much our core mission. We have found that there are building blocks that we need to build in order to get there. So now we still have very much this prediction market focus and a focus on conditional tokens that we can talk about later as well. But we're also building smart wallets, so smart contract-based wallets that let you interact with dApps more efficiently and have distinct advantages in terms of usability and user experience and security. And we also build novel market mechanisms in order to trade outcome tokens for prediction markets and other things.
But is Gnosis then, is it like because now it sounds like there's a number of different projects that Gnosis is building to reach a larger goal, but do you almost think of it like is it a research company? Is it a dev house? Is it in itself like a miniature, and this may be a weird way to think about it, but like a miniature version of consensus where it's like spinning out kind of newer ideas?
Yeah, so I think you're hitting on a sore point for us. I think basically all the things that we've built and that we're still building are super interesting in their own right. If I had to do it again, I think I would put more focus on focus. So basically thinking up a new project and thinking about how much sense it would make if we had that and how wonderful that would be. That's not good enough. So basically, we're only human. So basically, you can't divide yourself up between a number of projects and still be as efficient as you could be if you only had one. That being said, so we have taken great care for the last year or so not to start any more projects, despite the fact that we have a gazillion ideas. So we will concentrate on the three that we have now because they also fit together really nicely in this triptych of create, trade, and hold. So create in this conditional token framework, trade within these novel market mechanisms that we're building, and hold within the smart wallets.
Okay, let's kind of step through that, because I actually don't think we've ever had anyone on to talk about prediction markets. Like, we have to kind of go back a step and define, like, what is the Gnosis prediction market? What was the first initial idea of Gnosis?
The initial idea was that, in principle, a smart contract based blockchain makes it possible to create tokens that hold worth only under specific conditions. So things like €1 under the condition that Brexit happens October 31st, or €1 under the condition that it doesn't. So in principle, if you put these two together, they're always worth €1 because either one happens or the other. But if you actually have some sort of external input that tells you whether Brexit happens or not, you can make them resolve automatically, and you can trade them individually. So you can have the yes token or the no token, and the value at which they trade, so say 30 cents on the dollar or 95 cents on the dollar, gives you the probability that the market assigns to that event happening or not happening. So in a way, it's a lot like a stock market, only you're not trading parts of companies, you're trading information.
Could it also be, I mean, it sounds like it comes a little bit out of like betting and gambling, possibly. Is it like, or what is, I mean, this system without the blockchain, I believe, has existed for a long time, right? Like, this is like even digitized, but not blockchain necessarily.
So basically, the answer is yes. So basically, betting transfers to this one-to-one. So basically, any betting market you can actually display as a prediction market. It's not true the other way around. So basically, there's a lot of contracts that we enter into in an everyday setting that kind of have the same payout structure. So for instance, say you have fire insurance for your house. Then basically in betting terms, you could say it's a bet on your house burning down, because there's a payout if your house burns down, and there's no payout if it doesn't. So that's kind of exactly the same payout structure. So yeah, bets do have that payout structure. But also
More
lots
things.
of other things do too. Also, if you enter into a competition for a tender, for instance, that's also got the same payout structure. Or if you have an option on something, on the stock market, that's also got the same payout structure. So it's easy to see how betting kind of falls into this pattern, but a lot of other things fall into this pattern as well. And if you look at typical betting markets, they are fairly constrained in what you can actually bet on. Typically, it's sports, so next goal to score,
Totally.
sort of thing. That's very much what we as a company are not interested in. So we're interested in making information that was previously not tradable, and thereby eliminating information asymmetries and enabling people to take better decisions based on better information.
Do you know any projects more in like the Web 2 space, or like regular startups that are kind of trying to do something similar without blockchain?
Absolutely. So the one that most comes to mind that many listeners may actually know is InTrade. So InTrade was this political prediction market that existed 10 years ago or so. And you could place predictions on, US American primaries and presidential elections and geopolitical events around the world. And there was a decent amount of activity, and also the forecasts turned out to be eerily accurate. And it was actually one of those, if you look at the total user base, it wasn't humongous, but it got a lot of coverage because journalists like that kind of thing. They like reliable, crowdsourced information.
Yeah. In this case, like adding the incentive layer actually helped probably drive a participation.
Yeah.
If it was just sort of like, what do you think? Answer this poll. for nothing. It's not going to get the same kind of dedicated participation.
Yeah, and so basically that's kind of like a survey or a poll. So where you basically just ask people, what do you think is going to happen? But typically, if people actually have to back up their beliefs with money, they are more accurate. And also, if people have better insights, they're typically willing to place more money on this, because if they think the crowd is wrong or people are wrong about what's going to happen, then to them it's basically free money. So basically, it's all based on the premise that markets are inherently efficient. So basically, if you don't believe in that, then prediction markets are really not for you. But if you would agree to that markets typically work, then this is a super interesting way of eliciting information from the crowds. And the way and why it hasn't actually been that much of a thing in the past decade or so is basically InTrade fell apart due to a number of unfortunate events. So their CEO died on Everest, and they had a prediction market on the price of gold, where basically the CFTC had told them to please take that down, and they had. And then basically the knowledge that apparently they had this conversation got lost, and they relisted it a couple of years later and got shut down, and basically there wasn't enough stamina to start it up again. So in principle there was interest, because the payout structure so closely resembles betting. There is prediction markets move in a tricky regulatory regime, basically explaining to regulators why this is not betting or why it's not gambling, or why maybe you can call it betting, but then the stock market should also be called betting. This is difficult, and we have taken tremendous care to actually interact with regulators and explain them our reasoning. And so basically a lot of resources on our end have gone into that. And this also led to us getting an in-principle license to offer prediction markets to retail customers, at least in Europe. So that will be going live soon. And if you would like to sign up for that, even now before it happens, go to site.pm, so site as in eyesight, .pm, and sign up, and we will invite you for a beta that's starting soon.
Cool. We'll add that to the show notes. So this is, I have to ask another question on the prediction markets before we move on, though. The other big project in the space that is very well known for being a prediction marketplace is Augur. Like, what's the difference between Augur and Gnosis?
So it comes very much from the same place. So it also comes from this idea of crowdsourcing information. It is a blockchain-based prediction market. The way that Augur works is different in a number of ways. First and foremost, Augur actually makes their money as a decentralized oracle. So basically the rep token, the reputation token that is associated with Augur, you need that in order to determine which of the possible outcomes took place and which didn't take place. So basically it is a decentralized oracle mechanism, which is a super hard thing to build, because obviously you need an escalation procedure. And they have that. And it's a really good procedure.
How do you, can you work with them?
Yeah, so basically we can piggyback off that. So basically we decided to go the other way. So basically the Oracle problem is the one problem that we're not solving natively within Gnosis, despite the fact that we're building a million projects. Basically this is, Oracles is the one thing that we've always said, we'll be Oracle agnostic, and you can plug into Gnosis whichever Oracle you want. Also because we anticipated that, Oracle providers will spring up and grow out of legacy businesses. So basically, if you look at how news corporations are going to develop, what the business models open to them in the future, which ones will actually be viable, then providing good information to smart contracts is actually a really good one. So say the Reuters and BBCs and Bloombergs of the world, we anticipate that they will become Oracle providers in their own right. And that for most Oracle decisions, you don't actually need a fully distributed Oracle, because you're okay to trust some trusted instance, say the BBC or Reuters. So you don't actually need you don't need a decentralized Oracle for everything. You want an escalation procedure, and that's a good thing to have, but you don't need to have it fully decentralized just because that puts a lot of overhead on everything. So basically, we have concentrated on building good market mechanisms for the prediction markets that you can build on top of our platform. That's one of the things that Augur is struggling with. So actually having decent liquidity on the market. So if you actually check the markets, then there's a couple that actually have a decent trading volume, but the spread. So basically, if you buy something and then sell it again immediately, you actually lose quite a lot of money. So basically often on the order of like 10 or 20%. Obviously that doesn't happen if you have enough liquidity in the market. So basically what we've done is we have built these liquidity mechanisms that work even for markets that natively have low liquidity, like many sorts of information markets.
I want to just go back for a second to the question of like to the topic of oracles in this context, because in previous conversations and episodes, we've talked about oracles, but always in the context of price discovery on like for exchanges and stuff like that. How does an oracle, like I'm trying to sort of wrap my head around an oracle for information.
Yeah.
What does that even, like you just mentioned the BBC might become an oracle.
So basically, you have information that you can put out there, and you just need a cryptographic signature to go with it, so that you know that it's actually that you can actually use it. So basically, and then you point at that news source, and basically that it's kind of. So none of these are production ready yet. So there's one system called Reality.io. It's Edmund Edgar's project. It's a decentralized oracle in the sense that you can have the Augur escalation process. But in principle, supplying real world information into the blockchain is going to be a major business.
And a major challenge.
So basically, because you rely on your reputation a lot, because if you think about how much is it worth potentially to falsify one of these claims, then the deterrent, obviously, your reputation loss has to be bigger than whatever you stand to gain. So this is why we think that already existing companies that have a lot of reputation to lose are predestined to grow into this space.
Interesting. So from what I got, Gnosis and Augur are sort of in the same space, could potentially work together, but are focusing in a different direction.
Yeah, so basically Gnosis could even, because Augur actually has their business model centered around the Oracle, we could in principle even piggyback off of them. So basically you could actually specify Augur as an Oracle if you really wanted to. So the way that would work is you would set up the same prediction market in Augur and then just say, I'll use whatever outcome Augur decides has actually happened.
Cool. Okay, so the platform, the Gnosis platform, what's the other part? Like, so I now understand the Oracle part quite well, but what's the other part?
Okay, so the other part is what we call the conditional token framework. So basically, it is in the most general sense, it is the transfer of value, the tokenized transfer of value under a certain condition, and this you can use this for prediction markets. You can actually also use it for a number of other things. So basically, for completely diverse use cases. So you could use it, for instance, for access rights. You could use it in games. You could
use it for like insurance payouts.
In principle, you can use it for insurance payouts. You can use it for all kinds of financial products. You can use it even as conditional payment. Say, for instance, I hire you for a job, or you put in a tender for a job that I want to hire someone for. I could give you a conditional token as payment that only becomes worth something if you actually get the tender. So that would actually enable you to already give these tokens that you already received to your subcontractors, and your subcontractors already know that they'll be paid if only you win this tender. So basically, the use cases are endless. So basically it's a conditional token. It's a conditional token standard.
Is it a product? Is it sort of an interface that you've built, or what is the actual thing? Is it just the mechanisms behind it?
It is the mechanism behind it. So basically it's smart contract based, and it's very much against common wisdom of how you should build smart contracts. It is what we call a monolith. So it is one giant big smart contract to which anyone can append events. And you can then have tokens that pay out under whatever combination you want out of all the events that are already listed in that monolith contract. So this is in principle, this is infrastructure. Anyone can use it. We put it out there. Then we as a company have built an application on top of it to showcase it. That's Sept that we talked about earlier. So it's the information discovery use case. It'll start with very very blockchain-centered questions like, what's the maker stability fee going to be? Are there going to be more than 100 million DAI out there? When will multi-collateral DAI go live? And then basically you can trade all of these singly. So if you have strong beliefs for any one of these, but you can also create them. You can also trade them in a correlated manner. So you can say, I want to place a prediction on the stability fee under the condition that multi-collateral DAI go live by a certain date. So basically, you can kind of extract all kinds of information around the way that things happen, or the causalities, or even just correlations. So we think it's a tremendous tool to actually make information tradable, and actually for people to incentivize. To be incentivized to trade on these markets in order to reveal what they know and what they believe, and in order for other people to make better decisions off of that.
Wow. So what you're talking about there is almost like not a single prediction market, but rather like these linking of other. It's like you are building your own contract somehow, your own like unique cases. Like you'll say this sort of and if statements, like you've basically said, I want to predict that this will happen if this and this and this and this also happens.
Exactly.
And if none of those are done,
if none of these happen, you're just refunded.
You're refunded, yeah.
Exactly. So basically you can make very specific predictions. And yes, in a way it maps out the possibility space of the future, which basically to any single thing that could happen under whatever circumstance, it can in principle assign a probability. And obviously for now, we expect our first users to be humans, but in an age of big data and artificial intelligence, I fully expect that in 5 years' time, almost all of our users are going to be AIs that trawl data, and basically people or engineers who have good algorithms to extract this kind of data, they're basically being paid by society or by the people who actually want this information to provide this information, leading to a wealth of information out there and enabling people to make better decisions.
Would you say that this is still the core business?
Yes, this very much is the core business. This is what we wanted to achieve.
Okay.
And basically everything else that we're doing is kind of informed by wanting that to work. So we actually built the very first version of the smart contract in order to hold our own ICO funds. And that's still around. So basically, that's the multi-sig that held the largest amount of value in this space. So it was in the couple of billions, just because, more or less, or many ICO projects used it, and private people also use it. And that kind of segued into this project, the Safe, which is a personal smart wallet that is mobile first, and you can add multiple keys in order to increase security.
I realize we haven't actually talked about your team, and I feel like we should probably talk a little bit about your co-founders and how the company is a little bit distributed and what those other projects are. So you are one of the co-founders of Gnosis.
No, technically, I'm not a co-founder.
Okay, you're not a co-founder.
I joined very early, and I was there from the get-go. But in the beginning, I had a real job. So I joined Martin and Stefan after they had already founded. Martin and Stefan, they are two fantastic guys. They met at university 15 years ago or so, and they found that they can work together marvelously. So they started working together in 2015, when Martin met Joe Lubin. Joe obviously is the founder of Consensus and one of the co-founders of Ethereum, back in the day when Consensus was literally him and his assistant, Ashley. And Martin and Stefan kind of became the first Consensus employees and started working on this. Basically, they had this prediction market project on Bitcoin previously, and Joe convinced them that this would be way better suited to have this on Ethereum, despite the fact that Ethereum back then wasn't actually live. Wasn't live. So there was the white paper there, but that was about it. And they started building this on Ethereum. Yeah, so basically they started as a spoke within Consensus and were spun out into our own company now. In early 2017, we conducted a token sale afterwards.
Had you already joined by this point?
Yeah, I had joined then. Yeah, and then we conducted a token sale, and that was 2.5 years ago, and we've been building stuff ever since.
Okay. And you were like an earlier sale. Early 2017, you said?
Yeah, so we were in early 2017, so yeah, we were one of the earlier ones. Yeah, we lucked out in that respect. Yeah, so obviously there's always a big element of luck, right?
Okay, so you raised this fund, started to build the prediction market.
Yeah, we had actually something live by then. So basically, we were one of the very first projects that were actually live. So we actually had a prediction market platform live by the time that we conducted the token sale. And then basically getting regulators to approve took a long time. So we started building the infrastructure around it that we anticipated we'd need.
Ah, okay, I got it. And so what are those other pieces of infrastructure? So, and like who's maintaining what in the company?
That's a good question. So basically, Martin, Stefan, and I, we have kind of this rough division that I am responsible for prediction markets. Stefan is responsible for wallets, and Martin is responsible for the exchanges. We talk a lot. So basically everything is kind of consensus based between us. But those are like the rough responsibilities. Then we have a fantastic team. So we are just over 50 people now. We are headquartered in Gibraltar. We have an office there. All our finance and compliance functions are there. We have a second office in the north of Spain. Then we have a dev hub in Berlin, here at Full Node. And then we have another 10, 15 people who are fully remote.
So that's the team.
That's the team.
And so you just mentioned these two other projects. Mm-hmm. One, I mean, we kind of hinted at it, but it was like the wallet and the exchanges.
Yeah.
I think you've already kind of explained what the wallet is. Yeah. And it's a multi-sig wallet. And this actually, what is Safe exactly?
It's called, so basically it's the second version of this multi-sig, which is a personal smart wallet called the Safe. And there's a team version out there as well, which is basically the exact continuation of the Gnosis multisig. Only now, basically back in the day when Stefan programmed it more or less in the better part of a week, and that's what it looked like as well. So basically, Stefan's a fantastic programmer. He's not a designer. And it was never hacked, so we have to. I mean, it was a good product. It was just very much not the thing that we anticipated to take off like it did. So basically back then, obviously, gas costs weren't such an issue. And basically, if you were to deploy a new Gnosis multisig these days, it'll cost you like $20 to $50, depending on the exact gas price on that day. And the new version is much, much more efficient.
I see.
And it's also been formally verified. So as far as I know, it's currently the only smart wallet out there that's formally verified.
That's interesting. So that's sort of, this has come up a few times with a number of guests, this idea that like you build something with no idea how much value it's actually going to hold at some point.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you deal with that actually? I guess in this, like, did you immediately realize that you needed to kind of build a better version? Were you keeping like a very close eye on this contract once the value accumulated started to grow?
Yeah, I mean, it all happened so quickly, right? I mean, basically, if you think back to 2017, I mean, it was mostly that Ether just appreciated so much in such a short time frame, and all of a sudden, this thing was holding billions of dollars. And yeah, I had this recurring nightmare where basically someone would call me in the middle of the night and say like, "There's something wrong with the multisig. We've had a hack," and so knock on wood, it never happened. But yeah, of course, you think these thoughts.
I mean, that is very much like the nightmare scenario. And we know people who've gone through something like that. How did you, like, watching that sort of did you see the hacks happen to other projects and other multisigs, for example, and immediately look back at your project? Like, did that is that why you did formal verification? Like, was there like a lot of security fear?
Yeah, of course there is.
Yeah.
I mean, for one, our own funds were in that wallet. But also, if you think about everyone else who stores their funds in that wallet. Yes, so basically when the parity hack happened, it hit very, very close to home. And we've lucked out so far. But yeah, with the sort of value stored in these things, security really, you have to put that first and foremost. And we have very stringent practices as to when code can be changed, when audits happen. Basically, we went through the formal verification, despite the fact that we're actually not making any money off of the safe. We did that kind of it's kind of an infrastructure project, and we still spend a lot of money on paying for our formal verification just because we didn't want that to happen to us.
Did you do that after the parity hack happened?
Yeah, so basically we did that on the new version. So basically the new and gas efficiency improved one. So basically the old one, I think it's fair to assume that it is safe just because, if you think in terms of potential payouts, it was just a huge honeypot, right? So basically, had there been a vulnerability, it probably would have been exploited by now. So yeah, we did it for the new improved version, and that's come back clear. And you can actually we make it a habit to publicize all our security audits, so you can actually go look at that on the internet.
Okay, so now we're kind of getting into the third part of the business. So of the three main categories we listed earlier on, the last one being exchanges. But what does that actually entail? Like, what is an exchange? Or what are exchanges in the Gnosis context?
That's a really good question. So exchanges, we all know exchanges. So decentralized exchanges, centralized exchanges, and so on. And basically to us, it seemed that building an exchange on a blockchain actually comes with very specific constraints, namely that time on blockchains is not continuous. And that is very much not like if you go to a stock market, then time is continuous, and that's why traders like to be closer to the stock market in order to have lower latencies in terms of their orders. But block time is inherently blocky, so it's discrete. So we thought about auction mechanisms, or we thought about exchange mechanisms that don't see this as a flaw, but as a feature. And that's basically the approach that we have taken to building exchanges.
So did you build a DEX? Because I also heard about the DX DAO, which you've also done. So where does this all fall?
Yeah. So basically we've experimented a bit. So basically the very first DEX that we built was the Dutch exchange, which was based on the Dutch auction contract that we actually used for our own token sale. The idea was that for low liquidity tokens, actually having an order book is very inefficient. And if you go to DEXs, and I mean, there's a couple of liquid pairs, but if you look at all the other pairs, they're illiquid, and you have a large spread, and you have large slippage. So basically the price changes fast just because there's not enough liquidity. And one way of combating this is just batching things together for a while. So saying like we are batching a couple of hours together, and then basically everything will be cleared at the same price. So what we actually had is we had this mechanism where an auction started at an arbitrary price, so actually twice the past clearing price. So say the last clearing price for Ether was 200 DAI. So basically you'd start at 400 DAI. And then basically everyone who wanted to sell Ether for DAI could put their Ether into a contract. Then the price for the Ether in this contract would drop, and people would send DAI at that point in time where they are happy with the price, and they would receive that price or less. And basically, when the total volume of Ether to be sold and DAI to buy this Ether would kind of match up at the current price, the auction would stop and the entire thing would be cleared at that price. So basically, the time at which you send your payment token, this indicated your willingness to pay. And from a game theoretical perspective, this is a really good auction mechanism because it makes sure that, well, first of all, everyone pays the same price and everyone pays what is the fair market price.
The market has actually defined somehow.
Exactly. Regardless of what they were actually willing to pay, how much it was worth to them. So it can be argued that this is the fairest way of actually conducting a sale for fungible goods.
And this protects that front-running case.
Exactly. So basically you can't front-run on these exchanges. So basically if you look at decentralized order book exchanges, front running is a huge risk. And basically there have been analyses of this. So basically, maybe we can put the link in the show notes, but Phil Dayan, he's done this entire page on how much front running costs you on DEXs. And it's like 1% to 2%. Wow. So that's how much you lose on all trades. And that combats that. It also combats the spread. So basically if because everyone gets the same price. And in principle, so basically it's slow. So that's the one drawback. So basically it's not an instantaneous thing. So you send your tokens and you get your return tokens a couple of hours later. And we try to make this into the tagline. So slow trades, fair trades take time, and you can actually still find it on the internet. It's at slow.trade. And it didn't really take off.
It's like an amazing experiment.
It's an amazing experiment, and people have used it for auctioning. So basically, we've done experiments ourselves where we said, okay, we have extra DAI. We will auction this off for Ether, and we will auction off 100,000 DAI at once, which is something that typically decentralized exchanges, they cannot take this kind of, you'll get enormous slippage if you put, say, 100,000 DAI on IDEX. You'll lose a large portion of your money. And we did this 10 times in a row. So actually we auctioned off 1 million DAI. And in the beginning, we had like a little bit of slippage before like market makers were looking into this. So basically on the very first auction, we lost 8%. But the subsequent auctions, they close within 1% of the actual DAI price. And basically having a decentralized auction mechanism where you can actually put $100,000 worth of anything on there and get more or less fair market value. This was a novum. But obviously the user experience was a lot different from what people were used to.
With exchanges.
With exchanges, because people typically want, it also gives you peace of mind, right? So basically you don't need to think about that, there's still like a process open that you need to check on at some point in time. And also it doesn't really guarantee. So basically, despite the fact that we did these experiments and we kind of show it that it kind of closes more or less within market price, there's no guarantee for that. So basically, in principle, it can drop to zero. And I mean, obviously, that's a market failure and it shouldn't happen. But there's no guarantee against that, because in effect, you're placing a market order. And I think people are inherently adverse to that. It was a super interesting experiment. And I think I'm happy that we undertook it. I still believe in the market mechanism of Dutch auctions for many things. I think in principle it was a super valid experiment, and we actually ended up gifting this protocol to a DAO that we helped summon together with DAO Stack. It's called the DX DAO, and basically it can make decisions on whatever. It's a DAO, it's its own thing. And we have no part of it. anymore. So we just helped jumpstart it. But we gifted the DAO this protocol. So basically, I mean, obviously there's parameters that you can set. So basically, how much funding does an auction need to have in order to actually set off a new auction? How much of the, so on the Dutch exchange, you didn't extract value, but there was a liquidity fee that went into the next pot, and basically how much that is, that can be changed, and what kind of tokens can be whitelisted to generate the reward token. And I mean, basically, there's all kinds of parameters that can be set in principle, and we gave that to the DXDAO.
So the DXDAO in itself, that was also a project that I heard about, and I think I've mentioned on a previous episode with Aragon, with Jorge. So what I heard with DXDAO, a friend of mine pinged me and was like, oh my God, there's this DAO and it has incredible distribution and participation and everybody's really excited about it. I mean, the way you sort of say it, you summoned it and then you sort of like let it be. What has happened with the DXDAO?
The DXDAO is still running the Dutch exchange, so it's still very much out there. There's proposals in there that you can look at now. There's around, I think, 300 to 400 distinct individuals who hold reputation within this DAO. It's based on the DAO stack protocol. So in principle, it's got this scalable consensus mechanism that they call holographic consensus. It is a really nice piece of software.
Did it become, like the story that I heard though is a few members started to accumulate more of the...
There are a couple of people who hold a large amount of the reputation. So basically, if you got the right 15 people, maybe the right 20 people into a room, you would get more than 50%. But still, it's people we don't know and we are not affiliated with, who did this of their own accord. And there's 300 more people who are also members of the DAO and who also hold reputation and vote in votes.
Okay. I have a last sort of question on the tech.
I also have so basically we're building a new exchange. That's why I said exchanges. So do you want me to go into that now?
Sure. Yeah, why not?
Okay. And so basically the Dutch exchange was in my eyes, this is like the first version of an exchange that we build that kind of uses the advantages that blockchain actually has over continuous systems. We're taking this to a new level with a product whose working name currently is Diffusion Exchange. So the Diffusion Exchange is also a batch auction based exchange. It's not based on the Dutch auction, and it's not based on pairwise auction. So you wouldn't auction off Ether against DAI and DAI against Ether, but you actually throw all possible orders into one pot. And then you find the optimal solution across all of these different orders. So this has a number of nice side effects. Say, you want to sell token A for B, I want to sell B for C, and the third person wants to sell C for A. On a traditional order book exchange, we would never be matched. Or we would rely on arbitrageurs to actually do arbitrage between these different order books. But in a one-pot exchange, there would be a ring trade or a higher order ring trade that can actually still solve this natively within the exchange. And because we're assuming that we'll live in a multi-token world with a lot of tokens. And I mean, we can even see that now with the way that stable tokens are going. So there's not just one stable token, there are 10, and probably at the end of the year, there'll be 20 that have like some amount of traction. And you can actually trade any token against any of these stable tokens. And in principle, it would totally make sense to pool the liquidity on all of these order books. But basically on an order book based model, you can't do that. So basically in like the one pot exchange, you can find the optimal solution across all of these. And if you look at how that's better than a conventional order book exchange, it's marginally better if you have one central token against which everything is traded. So currently a little bit like Ether. But if you trade a large number of low liquidity tokens against each other, order books become incredibly inefficient, and having this one pot actually helps a lot. And we're building a proof of concept that is out in the coming months with a working name of StableX, which does exactly that for stable tokens, because that's a lot easier to build, because everything is close to one, and people can provide liquidity at more or less no risk to themselves.
It's funny because just going back to earlier in our conversation where you were like, no, we're getting more focused, more and more focused. And I'm like, well, it sounds like there's still some experiments.
You should have seen us a year ago. But basically, it's like we went wild on all the different ideas that we had. But basically, it really fits into the entire thing, because if you look at conditional tokens and outcome tokens, these are ERC20 tokens, and basically. If you look at information tokens, conditional tokens that have a register of different conditions, by definition, they will be low liquidity, and you will need a good trading mechanism in order to trade them efficiently, in order to actually to enable this exchange of information that we envisage. And this is why we need the diffusion exchange.
That sounds like that's fair. But I have one other question about another project or a side project, or I don't know if it's still around. But I remember there was a team working on zero knowledge stuff. Yes. And I came into contact with them because they were organizing a trusted setup. Mm-hmm. I think maybe thinking about doing a universal trusted setup. So what happened with that team, and where did that live?
That lives in the diffusion space. So obviously having this one pot exchange is computationally complex, and doing this on-chain is unfeasible. So the idea is that anyone can submit a solution to a list of tokens that are in a closed batch, and say this is the solution how to redistribute them in a more or less optimal way. And the idea is that people submit this alongside a zero knowledge proof that this is actually a valid solution. Obviously, the privacy aspect is also great, but mostly in terms of the scaling that it gives you. Namely, that you can prove that this is a good solution without actually having to go through the entire solution on-chain. And we are still interested in that. The team is still following developments, but basically coming up with 3 different things at once, namely how to build this novel market mechanism, even outside of the blockchain space, then how to put it on blockchain, and then the third, how to get it to scale efficiently. We found that there's so much happening in the zero knowledge area that's kind of it's kind of taking care of itself. And basically we feel like we need to figure out how to build this marketplace on blockchain first, and then we'll worry about the scaling in a second step. But yes, we are basically integrating zero knowledge into this diffusion exchange is very much a thing that we will do in the future.
So it sounds, and I can follow that too. I mean, or I can attest to that as well, which is that there is a lot of development in zero knowledge, and things that were limitations like 6 months ago may no longer be limitations with new protocol upgrades or ideas.
And these things are they're happening, they're underway, they're dedicated teams working on them. And basically we feel that if we check back in 4 months when we figured out the other stuff, we can just piggyback off of what everyone else did.
Probably.
And I mean, by then, hopefully there'll be a universal trusted setup for Ethereum. I mean, that would be wonderful.
I think it's been really amazing to hear all of the things that Gnosis is working on. I've worked around you guys for quite a while, and I feel like I didn't know really what you guys are working on.
We're not good at marketing. So marketing is not one of the skills we bring to the table. We're builders.
But this sounds like it really is, there's so many ideas and so many tests being done, and I'm definitely excited to see where you guys go next. But let's talk sort of to wrap up about Berlin and this Berlin dev office and where we are right now, where we're recording out of, because we're in Full Node, and Full Node is a project that you lead on the side of all of this. What is Full Node? Where did it come from?
Full Node is a wonderful space that has kind of become the heart of the Berlin blockchain community. So it very much started with us in that we were working at the ETH office in Waldemarstraße before it moved. That was wonderful because everyone who worked on Ethereum was there at the time. And as nice as that was, it was a horrible office. I hope no one blames me for saying this, but basically it was more or less an apartment. There were no ways to actually have meetings there efficiently. Everyone took important phone calls on the fire escape because that was the one place where you could actually talk. But basically having this community was such an asset. And we had raised the money. We knew that we were going to hire people. So it was limited in space, and we also knew that we wanted a proper office. So we started looking at office spaces. And it was so sad, just the three of us looking for office spaces when we had, when we had worked in the space with this really vibrant, cool community. And at the same time, Brian, who is my co-host at Epicenter, Brian Crane, yeah, he was briefly the COO at Cosmos. And he was very much in the same situation, that he was looking for an office space for Cosmos. And he had the same experiences, namely that, just leaving the ETH office and its community spirit just seemed daunting. So basically we teamed up, Brian and I, and we started looking for spaces, and we found this. And we had just signed the contract when Brian stopped being COO at Cosmos, and it all fell on my shoulders.
But you guys are now co-hosts on Epicenter, so you're clearly still friends.
I don't hold it against him. These things happen. Yeah, I hadn't anticipated how much work it would be. So basically, this place, there was nothing in here. It looked a little bit bombed out. So we set up an office, and basically now 105 people work from here. There's regular meetups here. It's kind of where people come to if they come to Berlin and are visiting blockchain people, and that's wonderful.
It's also got a really good name, the Full Node co-working space. For anyone who hasn't been to Berlin, it's definitely a spot to check out. And I agree with you. I think it really, anytime there's the blockchain week or events happening in town, you'll come in here and there'll be all these teams from all over the world in the co-working space and sort of the open space. And there's these meetups. I think, the time that I've spent here has been really, really great. So thank you for putting that together for all of us and, helping to make this Berlin scene kind of really flourish. In a way, it's cool that it's not necessarily only in the ETH dev office also would have been Ethereum only, but actually this office I feel has also branched out. It is more kind of, it's a wider ecosystem.
Oh yeah, for sure. Here. So basically, and the number of people who've worked in here and moved out again because they grew, those are also, we're still friends with them. They're still in the network. So basically, 0x moved out, Centrifuge moved out. But also people move in. So recently Matter Labs moved in. And basically there's a lot of, there's movement in the space. Yeah. And that's wonderful.
Very cool. So listen, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
And I've said this to Sunny's the only other Epicenter guest who I've had on here, but I'm always open to another crossover if you guys want to invite me to Epicenter. I don't know what I'd talk about, but just putting it out there.
Cool. That would be super cool.
All right. So thanks again. And to our listeners, thanks for listening.